Lunch arrived several minutes later, arranged in silver inlaid magical containers that preserved the temperature and freshness of their contents. Leanne scowled down at her meal, leaving it untouched as their carriage rolled down the city streets. "We're going to the Empire," she muttered. "We are?" Florine furrowed her brow. "We are. This is stupid. How can four eminently eligible bachelorettes not manage to find a single consort between them?" "I wasn't looking," Clara said. "Me neither," Ludmilla added. "I haven't really been searching either," Florine said, "but it might be nice." Leanne looked up from her lunch, eyes shifting back and forth between them. "Let's do this," she said. "Let's go. All of us. There ain't any better time to do it." "Well," Florine said, "most of the tribes I've been working with are going to be inactive for the winter." "You have a point about it being the best time to go," Clara said, "but I still don't intend on accepting any consorts until I'm at least 20. "Finding the right person takes time," Leanne said. 2.5 years might be what you need to figure things out." That was another thing that Leanne didn't seem to understand. Or at least she refused to accept it. If Clara so desired, she could simply notify the temples and they would do the looking for her. All she would need to do is pick out of a well-researched list of candidates drawn from the carefully curated records of their faith. The way that Leanne phrased things made it sound like she was looking for a romantic relationship, but she should have known better than that. While it might be nice to experience, romantic love was a luxury to the nobility. Having loveless relationships for the sake of political ties was normal, though it did not necessarily mean that love would not blossom between such a match as time went on. If not for political purposes, some other benefit would be pursued through marriage, such as financial gain, drawing in a talented individual or securing a valuable bloodline. The nobles of the Sorceress Kingdom had little need for political advantage or financial security, so the remainder was their priority. Leanne and Florine were indeed possessed of a discerning eye when it came to their professional dealings, but Ludmilla had no idea how they behaved when it came to potential consorts. Perhaps they would be just as discerning and things would work out. "We'll see about that, I suppose." Clara did not press the issue. "In the meantime, there are quite a few things I would like to see in the Empire." "Great. Well, don't come crying if I snag someone you fancy," Leanne said. "What about you, Ludmilla?" "Sure." Leanne drummed the sides of her magical container, as if she had run unexpectedly out of things to say. "Really? I thought you'd be the hardest to convince. You stick to that border like a giant forest leech." "Yes, it probably has something to do with being a border noble," Ludmilla replied. "Some other things have happened that require me to be in the Empire, however. Operations won't begin until winter sets in, so I should be free to join you until then." "Are you permitted to tell us what your duties in the Empire are?" Florine asked. "It's a part of the ongoing changes to their security," Ludmilla answered. "I'll be acting as a liaison between the Imperial Army and the undead forces they're incorporating into the legions." Their carriage returned to the central district, where it turned to head towards Florine's manor. Leanne replaced the cover of her magical container, then placed a sheet of paper upon it. "So," she produced a pen, "when does everyone want to go?" "We're really going?" "Of course," Leanne answered. "We even got Ludmilla on board, Gem. There's the festival committee meeting tomorrow morning. How about we head out after that?" Ludmilla watched silently as Lady Wagner forged ahead. While Ludmilla did look forward to spending time together with everyone, was it really such a simple matter that they could leave on a day's notice? "What about accommodations?" "The Empire is busy year-round," Leanne replied. "There are a lot of well-to-do travelers, and every city has a nice place to stay. If they're needed, Florine and I have some connections we can call on." "And security arrangements?" Leanne drew her dagger in reply. She hiked up her skirts and buried the blade in her exposed thigh. Florine made a squeamish noise, but the result was practically the same as if Ludmilla had used the weapon on herself. The dagger simply entered her leg without creating a wound. Her friend's adamantine girdle actually conferred damage reduction that was superior to Ludmilla's racial damage reduction, as it could not be bypassed by magic weapons. "We can't get sick," Leanne said as she yanked out the dagger. "We can't be poisoned or mind-controlled. Weak spells can't hurt us. I scared the crap out of one of my smiths yesterday by sticking a hand in his forge. Nothing happened to my hand, by the way. Or the equipment." So you are bestowed new equipment meant to protect you from harm. Ludmilla frowned, and the first thing you do is go out and try to harm yourself.
Heck yeah.
Gotta see how everything works. I jumped out on the test course to get run over by a wagon the other day. Not even a scratch. She blinked wordlessly at Leanne's confident grin. Her friend had a bold inquisitiveness that could best even Germaine Linez. Plus, Leanne said, we each have a shadow demon from Lady Sheltier. If someone is dead set on hurting us, they're gonna have to get through those guys first. You're still going to have to inform the Empire that you'll be there, Ludmilla said. Arriving on such short notice seems overbearing. It's not an official visit, we're going for personal reasons. Letting them know is just a courtesy, or maybe we could make it an official visit? That clause we have with the Empire might come in handy. Prepare us your best men. Or something like that. You are not abusing that clause, Clara frowned. I was just kidding, Leanne rolled her eyes. You all know I prefer to do my own shopping. Anyway, the longer we let them stew, the more likely we'll get caught up in some stupidity. The Empire is just as sticky as Riestais when it comes to politics and ceremonial crap. The best way to counter that is to not give them time to think and prepare. In the end, they settled on leaving the following afternoon, staying the night at the new border town under construction in Wagner County. They did not need to sleep, but their staff certainly did. Each of them would bring their ladies' maids and a human footman. As with their journey to Fassett County, they would be using carriages that could convey them much faster than the average coach. The trip to Arwinter would take them 2 days, with a stop in the city along the way. Florine and Leanne disembarked at their manors, and the Solita brought Clara and Ludmilla out of the city. She was pressed slightly into her seat as the carriage accelerated over the highway. Ludmilla gave Clara a sidelong glance. You are going to be working on that translation in the Empire. It seems like a golden opportunity, yes? Clara gazed out the window. Too many words in that diary. CUs in the Empire, and the way they showed up after they separated from Riestais seems a purposeful act. One can only believe that the Empire is the best lead when it comes to this mysterious nation from Katz's past. This much was apparent to those versed in the regional languages. The script contained within the journal had bits and pieces that could be found in present-day language, but only the Empire seemed to be making a sort of half-baked attempt at resurrecting words that had already fallen out of use. A disquieting sensation settled in the pit of her stomach. Something is not right, Ludmilla said. If you feel that way, Clara looked over at her, then there is probably something to it. We just need to figure out what it is. Do you think whoever erased Katza is still around? You believe that bringing this investigation to the Empire is dangerous? It was just so thorough that I cannot help but worry. That being said, she had already asked Delishnish to find out what she could. It wasn't in a direct way, using a coin that should at least be familiar to some people in the region, hoping some incidental knowledge would appear as well. Even if something happened, she figured that a frost dragon could at least escape danger. I will keep the research to myself, Clara said. There should be plenty to work with searching for auxiliary references. Clara shifted closer, leaning on Ludmilla's shoulder. A quiet smile played over her lips. Besides, she said, Leanne has a point. The flimsy friends that you worry about are quite difficult to injure, now. Do not tell me you went and did something crazy, too. Ludmilla glanced down at Clara with a frown. I might have tried a few things. Clara's amethyst gaze shifted away. At any rate, if there is some insidious group enforcing ignorance over the matter, they are going to have to send some rather powerful assassins our way. Ludmilla sighed over the idea that she might be tempting fate. She wrapped her arm around Clara's waist and snuggled in. They spent the remaining time to Castle Corlin together in silence, where Ludmilla disembarked in front of the gate to cross the bridge. She sped past the harvested vineyards with their dying leaves on her usual route over the mountains to Warden's Vale. Along the way, she stopped to speak with several Chronos druids, though as a whole their rather blasé outlook on life meant that they had nothing exciting to share. Life went on, and that was good. Whatever was, was. Her visit did remind her of the tuft of Chronoswool in her bag, however, and she stopped at the harbour master's office upon arriving in Warden's Vale. Good afternoon, Lady Zaradnik. Jeeves rose from his desk in greeting. Is there anything I can do for you? Good afternoon, Jeeves, she replied. Does this look like anything to you? Ludmilla placed the tuft of wool on the counter. The diminutive skeleton merchant picked it up and examined it through a gold-rimmed monocle. This is wool? I recall seeing this somewhere before. Ah. The new product, I mean, this is wool from the Chronos Druids, yes? It is, Ludmilla nodded. Since it is wool, can anything be done with it? I believe that question would be better answered by a professional who works with fabrics, my lady, Jeeves said. In terms of its relative value, however, it appears to be worth a great deal more than the textiles derived from the marsh plants in the Vale. The skeleton merchant's raw sense of value was still a bit of a mystery to her. He could keep track of market prices for goods regularly flowing in and out of the harbour, but with new and unlisted items, he always fell back to the strangely low basic valuations he had for everything. What she did know was that these valuations were close to the liquidation values guaranteed by the Royal Treasury for a broad range of commodities. Is the value of this wool comparable to anything you've seen before? Ludmilla asked. Though the volume of our exports is increasing, Jeeves answered, I am sad to say that none of the materials we produce are as valuable as this wool. This assumes that you are referring to my basic sense for the value of commodities. She reached into the infinite haversack on her right hip, withdrawing a gold trade coin. How about this? If I were to make a rough estimate, a sack of this wool would be worth 8 of these gold trade coins. What? Just to be certain, Ludmilla said, what is the price of a sack of regular sheep wool by the same measure? Approximately 5 sacks for 1 gold trade coin, my lady. What about this round object stuck to the wool? None of the other Chronos appear to have them. It's just a sticker, my lady, Jeeves told her. Someone must have put it there, but the writing on it is simply a 1. No matter how I look at it, there does not appear to be any intrinsic value or special meaning. I see, Ludmilla said. Thank you, Jeeves. Ludmilla walked out of the harbour master's office, staring down at the tuft of wool. Given how Jeeves' basic valuations worked, Chronos wool was extraordinarily valuable. It was durable enough that an unenchanted steel blade could not cut it, and, by the Volk's claim, not flammable. She hadn't given it any consideration at the time, but Chronos Druid products were likely akin to materials from magical beasts. The Chronos Rangers, who used equipment made from Chronos Druid parts, might be far better equipped than one expected of a primitive society of beastmen. The question now was what applications this wool might have, and whether the Chronos were willing to part with their parts. As rangers and druids, they were very efficient with the utilization of available resources. Nothing ever went to waste. The tuft in her hand was not enough for weavers to work with, however. She could hardly shear the wool off of a Chronos Druid at the beginning of winter, so it was a question that would have to wait. Upon returning to her manor, Ludmilla spent the remainder of the afternoon catching up with the administrative tasks that had accumulated over the last 2 weeks. Leanne's sudden decision to visit the Empire meant that she would be leaving earlier than expected, but it meant little in the slow days of winter. Construction would continue, her rural tenants would be snug in their villages, and Ludmilla used the opportunity to have everyone catch up with her territory's educational standards. Shortly after nightfall, Ludmilla rose to the sound of someone approaching the front entrance. She poked her head out to see Glaza entering the hall. A Death Knight accompanied her, carrying the potted tree. Welcome back, Glaza, Ludmilla smiled. How was school? Fine. And the druid lessons? Fine. The dryad's manners were in sore need of refinement, but it was something that could wait until Ludmilla had time to properly dedicate to her. Are you getting along with Mrs. Lynham? She doesn't say anything, she just follows us all over the place. Did you safely see her home? Yes. Glaza went over to the part of the hall where Ludmilla was experimenting with the indoor cultivation of various plants, setting down her satchel. As she knelt and rummaged through its contents, her tree was placed under a light nearby. How is the magic item working out for you? Ludmilla asked. It keeps the space around my tree nice and warm, Glaza answered. I like it, but it's strange. I know it's winter and it's getting colder, but even without the hoop, I don't feel sleepy at all. That should be because of the type of tree you were born from, yes? Lord Mayor says that it grows regardless of the season. She looked down as Glaza rose with a notebook in hand, presenting it to her. What's this? It's something called homework, Glaza replied. The teacher said that we should show it to our parents once in a while. But dryads don't have parents. You're the warden of this land, though. I see. Ludmilla took the notebook in hand. In that case, let's sit down and take a look, shall we? Rain pattered over the cobblestones, filling the road with a web of tiny rivulets that flooded into the gutters. Peter Hoying shivered in the damp confines of Ingelfort's southwestern gatehouse. He hated the winter. It wasn't as cold in the city as the uplands in the east, but it was wet, the sort of wet that stole one's warmth away no matter how many layers they wore. He wiped the rain that slicked his forehead with a trembling hand, shaking off his soaked cap with the other. Hoying. A voice sounded from the office. You closed that gate yet? You deaf, old man? An army of the undead could come bashing down the walls and you wouldn't notice. Peter slammed the door behind him, walking over to the cast-iron stove in the corner. As he reached out for a fresh piece of firewood, the man in the office shouted at him. Don't you dare, Hoying. The hell you know what I'm doing? I can hear you. The old man, Keyes, seemed to only have an ear for things that he considered problems. Peter could swear that the man could hear any regulations being broken. I just closed that damn gate in the pouring rain. Peter complained. Let me warm up a bit, yeah? Those are the new rules, Hoying, Keyes told him. Go bitch at the Margrave if you have a problem with it. New rules, my ass. With the new kingdom on the border came a whole slew of problems. For whatever reason, the bloody emperor had gone and served up his empire to them on a silver platter, and the demands that they made had turned the place upside down. Ingelfort was the headquarters of the 8th Legion. Now, the 8th Legion was gone. The important folk called it reorganization, but throwing fancy words around meant nothing to the most. The army was gone and with it went most of its soldiers, the ones that half of the industries in the city serviced. All that was left was the aviary for the Imperial Air Service, the local policing forces, and a stripped-down military district that was rapidly turning decrepit. And that wasn't all. Ingelfort was the closest Imperial city to the Katza Plains, making it a base for the adventurers and workers who worked there. For some reason, their jobs had vanished. With those jobs went their coin. Without the 8th Legion and the subsidies that paid for high-risk commissions, the city had become a shell of its former self. It had only been a few months since the changes, but the citizens' lives had already turned for the worse. Everywhere, belts were being tightened and families were looking to get out. Not that most of them could. Every city had a pecking order of their own, and only those in the most sought-after vocations could find a new place for themselves. The city's administration was slimming down and cutting corners in an effort to avoid collapsing outright. Peter snorted. His father always told him that working for the city was best, the most stable. So much for that. It was a good thing he didn't listen and joined the army instead. He wasn't out to make a name for himself or rise through the ranks, and posts like his would be around for as long as the Empire stood. A dull pounding sounded through the gatehouse window. Someone was outside. Hoying? I heard, damn it. Throwing his soaked cap back on again, Peter clomped up the stairs. On the wall, he leaned out and peered down to find a long caravan stretching out beyond the light of the gate. He shouted down at the man in the front. Who's there? What they were was obvious, but he couldn't think of anything better to say. In response, the man wordlessly held up the emblem of the Merchant Guild. Gods damn it all. Couldn't they have arrived 15 minutes earlier? He didn't want to raise the stupid gate. Peter examined what he could of the caravan, looking for an excuse to keep them out. He couldn't be quite sure with the limited light issuing from over the gate, but it looked like the caravan had more women than usual. Near the front was a hooded figure, another woman, but her hood stuck out more than it should have on a human. He thought he caught a glimpse of pointed ears as she turned her head. An elf? Slavers then. The only elves that came from the southwest were from the theocracy, and they were all slaves. Maybe the extra women in the caravan were slaves, too. His gaze lingered over the elf's fine, exotic features. Her ears haven't been snipped, damn, she must cost a fortune. Some rich asshole's gonna be short a manor or 10. Peter continued to stare down, mesmerized by the beautiful elf. It was only when 5 hunched figures gathered around her that he came back to his senses. They were short. Hunched as they were, the tops of their heads barely came up over the elf's waist. His first thought was that they were some of the dwarves who had started to appear over the summer. The height matched, but they didn't look stout enough. Dark mantles and dark hoods made identification difficult. He called down to them. Hey! You fellows by the elf. One of them looked up at his call. The figure was not only cloaked and hooded, but also wore a dark cloth mask. And it clearly wasn't a dwarf. Beady eyes looked up at him from a furred face. A rat? Damn big one, too. Peter went back down the stairs, careful not to slip on the slick stones. Hey, Keys, what does the Empire have to say about, rats of unusual size? There's no such thing. Scratching his head under his cap, Peter went to open the gate. The wagons rolled through, plain as can be. He watched from the gatehouse door, hoping to catch another glimpse of the stunningly gorgeous elf. Much to his disappointment, she went by without looking in his direction. The short figures padded in her wake. Master, it is cold and wet. Yes, we are all chilled and soaked. The kind man has opened the gate, but we must not be in the way. Get inside, quick. Peter frowned and narrowed an eye as they entered the customs office. Maybe they were just some sort of beastmen. Gran. Mile per hour? Nemel Gran brushed fragments of baked potato from her mouth before turning from her desk. Yes, Captain, what is it? General Ray is calling for you. General Ray? She furrowed her brow in thought for a moment, then her eyes grew wide. General Ray, as in commander of the 8th Legion General Ray? It's staff officer of the 6th Legion General Ray now, Gran. What does he want? Who knows? You have your orders, Gran. The captain returned to his desk, pointedly trying to ignore any further attempts at conversation. Nemel crumpled up the wrapper of her late dinner, squeezing it in her fist as she left the office. No one liked talking about General Ray. He had a reputation as a cold and calculating commander, and rumors abounded over his ambition in the political arena. This was not, however, the reason why people did not speak about General Ray. As a noble scion herself, Nemel did not think poorly of the general's reputation. The Imperial Magic Academy raised the Empire's aristocrats to be cold and calculating to an extent, and a bit of healthy ambition was expected out of any member of the Imperial nobility. The reason why people spoke little of General Ray and stepped lightly around him was that he had been reorganized right along with his now-defunct legion. The Imperial Army, not wanting to lose a talented general, had shuffled General Ray into the staff of the 6th Legion, which was essentially a demotion. Now, everyone spoke and acted cautiously when it came to the man, fearful that he might take his frustrations out on a hapless soldier. Nemel pulled the hood of her mantle over her head as she jogged out into a light winter drizzle. The Imperial Army headquarters was 7 blocks away from the Winter Aviary. With the equipment of an aerial mage, however, Nemel was afforded a measure of protection from the elements. The streets of the base were well lit and swept clean, and even this late at night many other men and women were similarly running back and forth on various errands. Upon entering the 6th Legion's office, Nemel flipped off her hood and combed her fingers through her auburn hair. She did her best to check over her appearance before approaching the front desk. 2 clerks watched her expectantly. She picked out the more handsome of the two to address. Officer Gran, here to see General Ray. The young officer's expression soured, no longer looking so handsome. 3rd floor, he said curtly, 3rd door to the right. She nodded in thanks and offered him a bright smile despite his expression before going on her way. The 6th Legion's building was busier than Nemel had expected. Officers strode purposely up and down the halls and activity could be heard behind every closed door. It was an abnormal amount of activity for even the Imperial headquarters, and she could only wonder what it was all about. Hopefully, it had nothing to do with why she had been summoned. As far as the Imperial nobility went, Nemel was not very ambitious. She disliked being caught up in things that were too big, and what might count as her aspirations were probably laughable to most. Not long ago, she aimed to be like her sister, Panasys, who had obtained a highly coveted position as a maid in one of the ducal houses despite House Gran being minor nobles. As her senior year in the Imperial Magic Academy loomed near and reality set in, however, she decided she didn't have what it took to serve in the household of a great noble and explored her other options. There were multiple streams in the Imperial Magic Academy, an educational institution that cultivated the next generation of the Empire's nobility. Commoners were permitted entry, as well, but tuition was steep and scholarships were reserved for the most talented. Its original purpose was, as its name might suggest, to raise arcane magic casters for the Baharuth Empire. Founded by Fluda Paradine close to the same time that the empire had broken off from Rias ties, the school had since then seen the support of multiple emperors. Over time, the Imperial Magic Academy had expanded into various faculties to support the development, growth and administration of the empire, taking its current form under the reign of the emperor of 2 generations previous. A scion of House Gran, Nemel was the youngest in a long line of wizards who had served as nobles since before the empire had seceded from Rias ties. That being said, it was not any sort of famous lineage known for producing legendary magic casters. Instead, House Gran was best known for being reliable when it came to producing wizards. Every member of House Gran's main branch had eventually become a third-tier arcane caster. When measured against the shining stars of the empire, this fact lacked luster. By historical standards, however, it was an achievement that might be considered legendary from a statistical perspective. Magic casters were rare, and third-tier magic casters were extraordinary enough to be lauded as geniuses of a sort. To produce wizards capable of casting third-tier magic in an uninterrupted line over 7 generations was absurd. Sometimes, Nemel asked her mother and older sister why this was. The answer was always tradition. Or hard work. Or money. Commoners always scoffed at a noble family's traditions or viewed their practices as decadent quirks, but when said noble family popped out third-tier wizards without fail, these claims were difficult to refute. Nemel had, of course, enrolled in the Academy's magic stream. The demand for magic casters combined with her house's reliable reputation meant that nearly every arcane magic-related position in the Empire was open to her. House Gran was involved in the magic item industry, but Nemel treated this as a fallback in case her other aspirations didn't pan out. The Imperial Ministry of Magic would also welcome her with open arms, but the life of research and development that she would have embarked upon with them was too similar to the family business. Many of her friends and acquaintances had been inspired to enlist with the Imperial Army, so Nemel had ended up looking in that direction, too. As a noble, she knew that pursuing such childish attachments was no good, but if she could be successful at the same time, then why not? As a bonus, the Imperial Army served potatoes for breakfast, lunch and dinner. She was nowhere near brave enough to join the night companies like many of the boys in her class, but the Imperial Army offered as many positions for magic casters as the entire civilian sector. In the end, she decided that, if she wanted to stretch her wings, she may as well fly. The Royal Air Guard was well known for its elite ranks and cushy capital assignment, but each legion had air wings of their own, which were collectively known as the Imperial Air Service, for patrols, reconnaissance, and aerial combat. Her current posting was that of a trainee aerial mage. As a senior in the Imperial Magic Academy, her repertoire of spells was rather sparse. This was, however, by design, and her instructors in the Legion were prepared to teach her all of the essentials for a mage in her position. There was a lot to learn, but the basics were required to earn her wings. It was said that military service was 99% boredom, so utility spells came first. Fly was obvious, cast in case one needed to dismount in the air, was knocked off of their mount mid-flight, or to stay airborne if their mount was somehow killed under them. Message was crucial, as one could not simply speak to others or easily relay information from the back of a griffin or hippogriff. Next came magic used for the vast majority of patrol duties. Divination school spells for long-distance observation of potential issues and identification of caravan goods. She had several illusion and conjuration school spells to assist ground forces with the tracking and pursuit of targets. There was also a set of abjuration school spells for defensive purposes and, of course, various evocation school spells for the rare instances where close air support was required. Learning metamagic that increased the reach of her spells was also necessary. They had started Nemel out on highway patrols, which was where she hoped she would stay. Others might have aimed for more exciting work, but not Nemel Gran. All that mattered to her was that it gave her a common connection with her friends, paid well, offered decent working conditions, and was well out of harm's way. No one could hurt you when you were 5 kilometers in the air, after all. At least, that was what she had thought until recently. A week ago, their flight had come across a frost dragon. Her flight leader, a veteran dragoon, was trembling so violently that Nemel could hear the rattling of his armor from her spot in their formation. Apparently, the frost dragon was strong enough to wipe out the entire Imperial Air Service, including the Royal Air Guard, never mind a measly highway patrol. Fortunately, They had been able to carry out their duties without mishap, but Nemel never ever wanted to see a dragon again. "You must be Officer Gran." The greeting met her as she entered General Ray's office, and a bright smile instinctively popped up on Nemel's face. "You must be" was usually a lead-in for some other thing. Considering her position and lack of distinguished service thus far, it probably wasn't anything good. "Yes, General," she replied with a salute. "Officer Nemel Gran, sir." "Good," the general nodded. "I like that you're prompt." "Ah crap, he's buttering me up for something." General Ray cut a clean figure, with the distinct features common to imperial nobility. He was the very image of a model officer. In fact, she had seen several posters around the academy campus with his likeness upon them. The general had many admirers in the student body, but all Nemel could wonder about was what he would unleash upon her. "A week ago," General Ray said, "you encountered a frost dragon on your patrol near Ingelfort. That dragon destroyed a town. That dragon raided a merchant caravan. That dragon ate a herd of livestock. You let it slip by. It's all your fault. Anything could have gone wrong, but what could she have done?" "Yes, sir," she said carefully. "Frost 19, I believe." "Ah, you even remember the designation. Since you're already well acquainted, I'm sending you out." Nemel blinked several times, the smile on her face freezing solid. "Out, sir? Frost 19 has just arrived in Ingelfort. I'm assigning you as an attaché for the duration of their stay in the Empire." But Flight Control said that Frost 19 was due to arrive in our winter. "Sir." The corner of General Ray's lip curled up in disdain. "Flight Control needs to learn how to read and not make assumptions," he grated. "The submitted paperwork says that Frost 19 will be arriving in the Empire, and it has. There's no time to waste. Fly out as you are. You can arrange for someone to deliver your belongings later." "Understood, sir." The frozen smile melted off of Nemel's face the moment she turned away. It was all she could do to keep from sighing as she left the general's office. "They're sacrificing me to a dragon." In hindsight, maybe the night companies had been the safer choice. Officer Gran offered a salute and turned to walk out of the office on hurried steps. General Ray allowed himself a slight smile as his gaze followed her out the door. Perfect. The junior aerial mage was a nubile young noblewoman with a winsome smile that could capture the hearts of many men, but his gaze wasn't that which a man might bestow upon a woman who stoked the flames of his desire. It was a cool gaze with an equally cool smile. The look that one cast upon a useful pawn. Too perfect. Sometimes, be it in war, politics, business or romance, the world handed one incredible opportunities. An official from the Sorceress Kingdom had long been scheduled to arrive in the Empire under the designation of Frost 19. Whether it was a rider or the Frost Dragon itself, he couldn't be absolutely certain. Seeing that this type of designation was officially used for the Sorceress Kingdom's Frost Dragon slaves, however, the true representative was probably whoever Frost 19's rider was. The Imperial Air Service kept track of their flights in the same manner, so it didn't feel out of place. The submitted reason for Frost 19's visit was stated quite plainly: they would be observing the condition of the Empire's infrastructure, logistics and trade. If read by a merchant or a regular citizen, this seemed quite benign. The more naively idealistic might even consider it to be a friendly overture, an effort to become closer with a neighboring nation. To a military mind, however, it felt like the Sorceress Kingdom was testing them, attempting to provoke a response by flaunting their new relationship with the Baharuth Empire. "Show us your roads. Show us your lands. Show us your cities, industry and everything you do to uphold order and maintain security. Show us your weaknesses." This was what passed through Ray's mind when he first had the documentation delivered to him by an aide. He hadn't even known that it existed until being informed that an air patrol under his jurisdiction, the former jurisdiction of the 8th Legion which was still undergoing reorganization, had intercepted a frost dragon on its way over the border. The paperwork was submitted in such a way that it looked like any other piece of scheduling managed by the officers of the Imperial Air Service. There was little chance that anyone else had taken special note of such an innocuous filing. Except for the fact that a flight control officer in our winter had to dig up the document in response to Officer Gran's report. When it came to paperwork involving the Sorceress Kingdom, everyone processed it as quickly as possible and filed it away, forgetting that they ever had anything to do with it. Now that it had resurfaced after some months, however, The imminent arrival was bound to draw attention. He had to move quickly to take control of the situation, but his influence in our winter was frustratingly small, and his clout as a baron from the southeastern marches was even less so. He racked his brain and twisted more than a few arms, trying to get ahead of the pit of vipers that was the center of imperial power. And then, a miracle happened. Frost 19 had checked in at Ingelfort rather than flying directly to our winter. They would be staying for 2 days, barring inclement weather. In a frenzied move, he had sent Officer Gran, who was under his authority, and personally sent her out as an attaché under the justification that she was familiar with the Sorceress Kingdom's official representative. He couldn't be certain who else knew. The Imperial Army was a monstrous organization where one could never be sure of interpersonal loyalties or who was whispering to who. Still, General Ray was reasonably certain that he had beat everyone else to the punch. First, the report of Frost 19's arrival went through Ingelfort's command structure, which was still undergoing the slow transfer of personnel, authority and materiel to the 5th Legion. As the interim commander of the remaining forces, General Ray had all reports related to Frost 19 delivered directly to him. Secondly, he had sent his pawn out on the back of a hippogriff while everyone else had to rush their hand-picked agents overland. To be sure, his competitors would still try, but he had gained a lead of days over his closest competitors, perhaps even a week. If he was lucky, the suggestion that Officer Gran was already familiar with the incoming representative was deterrent enough against any of the more forceful attempts at exerting influence over the situation. Officer Gran was an ideal pawn, as well. She was the son of a minor interior house, meaning that she should know what she was being sent out for and possessed of various methods to achieve his unstated objectives. As an officer in training fresh from the Imperial Magic Academy, she should still be nearly uninvolved in Imperial politics beyond House Gran's affairs, which were of no concern to anyone of true importance. If everything went well, Ray might very well have his foot in the door when it came to making connections with the movers and shakers of the Sorceress Kingdom. The office door opened. Ray was already rising to his feet before he could fully see who was coming in. Only one person in the 6th Legion wasn't required to knock before entering his office. General Gregan, he offered a salute. Ray, the commander of the 6th Legion, held up a set of file folders. "It just got damn busy here. I was almost run over by a girl coming out of your office. You've caught wind of our new orders?" "I have a feeling you're going to tell me anyway," Ray replied with a tight smile. General Gregan separated out one of the folders and tossed it onto Ray's desk. "Straight from the Field Marshal," General Gregan said as he turned back out into the hall. "I've called in the heads. They should be here within 30 minutes. With a frown, Ray reached down and picked up the folder. There hadn't been this much excitement since the reorganization of the Imperial Army had been announced over the summer. His lip twisted sourly at the memory. After clawing his way up through the ranks as an insignificant border noble, Ray had been appointed as general of the 8th Legion by the Emperor. 2 years later, the 8th Legion was disbanded. His only consolation was that he had ended up as a staff officer in the 6th Legion, which hardly compensated for the influence, prestige and power that he had lost as commander of the 8th Legion. General Ray flipped open the folder as he slowly walked around his desk. His steps stopped after going through the first half of the first page within. A smile slowly formed as he flipped through the rest. He joined General Gregan in the conference room. Before long, the division commanders arrived, taking their places at a long oak table. 2 of the 6th Legion's divisions were out on the southern border with their commanders, so an aide closed the door after the 3 in our winter had joined them. "I'll let you catch up before we start," General Gregan told them. Having read through the subject matter already, Ray spent his time gauging the reactions of the other officers. He could guess at what point they were in their reading as they went through a wide array of expressions. Overall, those who were disturbed and those whose disquiet had slowly been replaced by looks of anticipation were as he had expected. "So this is it," the commander across from him, Verts, said. "They're actually making us do it." "The 6th Legion's orders were expected," another commander stated. "We've been preparing for it since the summer, after all. But the blister, if that goes sideways." "That's the 2nd Legion's problem," Ray said. "If General Carbane can't pull it off, none of us can." Ray didn't give a damn about the 2nd Legion's orders. The 6th needed to carry out theirs and produce results. "And if he doesn't," someone snorted, "I hope our Demon King next door is happy with the results." "Idiot." General Ray is right, General Gregan said. General Carbine is stationed where he is for good reason. Discussing the 2nd Legion's orders does us no good at this juncture, we have a job to do. Around the table, the staff heads of the 6th Legion nodded slowly in agreement, expressions turning firm. The legions of the Imperial Army originally numbered 8, each responsible for their respective stations within the Baharuth Empire. Our winter was protected by the 1st Legion, whose general served as the Field Marshal of the Imperial Legions. The 1st Legion consisted of many of the Empire's best knights, including those of the Royal Earth Guard and the Royal Air Guard. The 2nd Legion was stationed in the cities along the eastern circuit of the Ballista in the northwest. The 3rd, 4th and 5th Legions garrisoned the Carnassus marches from north to south. The 6th Legion was responsible for the Wyvern Mark and the 7th Legion had been stationed in the western marches running along the Azalizia Mountains. Ray's Legion, the 8th, once garrisoned the Katza marches. This all changed with the advent of the Sorceress Kingdom and the Baharuth Empire's face-heel turn from ascendant power to client state. The Empire had been shackled by an unsettlingly broad clause that legally obligated them to recognize the absolute nature of the Sorcerer King and his representatives. It was a menacing blade pointed at the throat of the Empire, and no one with half a brain believed that it was simply there for show. After several months of nothing in particular, the first stroke of that blade descended upon the Imperial Legions. Despite appearing forceful and arbitrary to those unaware of the Imperial Army's workings, it was quite sound from a military standpoint. The 7th and 8th Legions were to be disbanded and the Sorceress Kingdom's undead forces leased to the Imperial Army. As many of those undead were sufficient to devastate legions single-handedly, one could hardly argue that the move had diminished the Empire's ability to defend against its enemies. With their bolstered forces, the disposition of troops in the remaining legions shifted towards filling the holes in domestic security left behind by the 2 missing legions. The change would not be enough to keep all of the Imperial Army's forces formerly garrisoned at the borders busy, so the 6th Legion had become a detached legion. To those keen to exploit opportunities, it was an army free to expand the Empire's borders. No one in Imperial High Command was blind to it, and so the 6th Legion had been converted into the Baharuth Empire's expeditionary force. It was a much-needed boost to the flagging morale of the Imperial Legions and, for the first time in the Empire's history, the lowest-ranked legion superseded the 1st Legion as the assignment of choice for promising new talent. With conquest came honors, and honors meant promotions, riches, and titles. 3 of the 6th Legion's divisions trained non-stop a day's march north from our winter. The remaining 2 divisions were exercising along the southern border. Anticipation grew week by week as everyone waited for the Emperor to unleash them against a frontier left long untamed. There were concerns in the political arena over this aggressive move, however. Some worried that their actions would upset the powerful city-state alliance in the east, giving them common cause against the Empire. Others thought that it might be used as justification by the Sorceress Kingdom to impose punitive restrictions on an unruly member of their hegemony. A solution for these concerns came quickly enough. The Empire would insinuate to their suzerain that they were ready and willing to expand their borders and thus bring more territory into the Sorceress Kingdom's sphere of influence. Then they would wait for someone on the Sorceress Kingdom's side to examine the notion and issue a response. If they were sent out with the Sorceress Kingdom's blessing, worries over being punished would be non-existent. Carnassus reacting by collectively moving against them was the best-case scenario. The Empire would be in a defensive war that they could not possibly lose with the Sorceress Kingdom's undead forces, and they would have clear justification to move against their neighbors to the east. One might have questioned whether it was wise to manipulate the Sorceress Kingdom for their own ends, and that person would be considered a fool by their betters. Not a single person believed that the Sorcerer King and his court of monsters were stupid enough to not understand what was going on. It was simply how the game was played, the unspoken dialogue between a subordinate and their overlord. The Baharuth Empire might have willingly chained itself, but they could ensure that their leash was long indeed. As they reviewed the instructions and finalized their preparations, the commander of the 5th Division, Tillman, spoke up. "Do we have any information on this liaison officer that they're sending along with the undead?" It was the question that was probably foremost in everyone's minds. "Who knows?" Wirtz waved a calloused hand absently. "There's no name provided, so maybe they're one of the undead, too. Intelligence reports say that elder liches serve as officials in the Sorceress Kingdom," Ray offered. "Gods help us if so," The russet-haired commander of the 4th Division, Schuler, groaned. I already have headaches thinking about all of the howling from the temples we're going to have to deal with. Never mind the temples, Tillman tugged at his black goatee, we have all the clerics and priests in the divisions to consider. As long as they kept the undead separate from the troops and away from population centers, Ray didn't think there would be much of a problem. People tended to only complain about what they thought they noticed. If this liaison officer was undead, however, it would certainly raise some hackles in the army camps. Then, Commander Wirtz looked around the table. Should we be relieved if they send a monster our way? General Gregan barely suppressed a helpless laugh. This liaison officer is going to be over with General Carbine first, he said. I'm sure he'll have a lot of fun working out all the kinks while trying to deal with the blister. Word of what happens out there is bound to come our way, and specific details will come before this liaison arrives in the south. Whatever happened, whatever they were, Ray would make sure he ended up on this liaison officer's good side. He would be damned if he was stuck as a staff officer until another general retired. Rather than being the one on the end of the leash, he would get on the side of the one holding the chain. He had already gotten ahead with the rider of Frost 19 by sending Officer Gran, and he would personally deal with this other official when they arrived to advise the 6th Legion. We have a month to get the divisions fully mobilized and set up at their positions in the Wyvern Mark, General Gregan told them. This is what we've all been waiting for. I expect a hell of a show. As one, they rose from their seats. For the Empire, General Gregan intoned. For the Empire, Schuler echoed. For the Empire, declared Wirtz. For the Empire, Tillman nodded sharply. Ray smirked. For the Empire,